Sancho to score. No mistakes this time.
That is a rocket.
Royce and another fantastic goal by Marco Reus. Haaland's volley is beautiful beyond compare.
Jetzt kommt das Wunder von Dortmund. Foulspiel von hinten an Götze.
Needs to lay it off. We're going to shot away. Oh, what a goal!
Welcome back to Dortmund Dispatch. Today I'm joined by Brian and Joey, and we have a lot of topics with a lot of transfer stuff going down. We're going to break down all those transfer rumors for you, and we've also mentioned that we didn't want to get into, on some of the weekly episodes, some of the drama with the board. So we're going to start there, but stay tuned because we are going to break down all the stuff with Danielle Mullen, James McAtee, and some other transfer rumors going around. But first, we hinted at it, talking about how we could do a full episode on the board and all that stuff. So I don't know where to start with this, but essentially over the last 10 years, after Jurgen Klopp has left, a lot of the inefficiencies with the board have kind of come to light, I would say, is the best way to put it. You lost some of the continuity with guys like Mislintat leaving, and the modernization of scouting, essentially, where the club essentially went and picked the highest, most highly rated, like U16 player in the world and scouted them heavily, made the inroads with their agent, and then would sign them between 17 and 19. And you saw that succession with Dembele, Bellingham, Sancho, Haaland. But now, again, clubs have evolved from trying to sign like 25 to 30-year-old prime age players to then trying to sign the younger age players. And the club has found itself in a bad position, essentially, compared to where we used to be, obviously, regularly competing for Bundesliga titles and then regularly finishing second and now regularly competing for fourth place. And we're going to be breaking down some of the reasons that's going on. So Kehl's contract has essentially been slow-walked. Let's start off. Do we think Sebastian Kehl is the problem? And I think this is where we're going to start getting into some of the deeper issues with the team that go beyond Kehl. But do you think Kehl's contract should be renewed, and why do you think it hasn't been, Brian?
I think so. I don't necessarily think Kehl is the issue, because we've seen on numerous occasions that the work that he's tried to do kind of ends up being blocked one way or the other. And I think the predominant example for me with this very early on during the transition was the transfer of Edson Alvarez. Hindsight is 2020, right? We've stuck with Emre Can as our main defensive midfielder. Meanwhile, Edson Alvarez has gone on to West Ham, I believe it is, and done pretty decently for them too there. But I mean, like, it's kind of just that sort of situation where you have Kehl, who has a vision, and you have, in that case, from what was being talked about in the media, it was Edin Terzic and other individuals that blocked a transfer like that. And this is just one example of other transfers that have gone through, or that I should say that didn't go through because of this kind of like process of blockading his decisions and all of that. So I don't think we can necessarily, pin much blame on Kehl, because at the end of the day, like, he also hasn't been able to fully work as openly as maybe a sporting director should. So that necessarily isn't on him. As to why the contract hasn't really been signed yet, I mean, once again, media speculation is what we're going off here. You hear all these stories about how he doesn't get along or doesn't see eye to eye with everyone, on the board and all that stuff. So I don't know. I mean, like, it's hard to say without actually being like a fly in the wall and like actually hearing these conversations. But it seems like there isn't like a full alignment on what the vision for the club moving forward should be. Like, Kehl is pulling one way and the club at times is pulling another. and that is detrimental to a sporting director's work. So unless everyone is aligned and going in the same direction, you're going to see stuff like this where decisions are not made in unison. Then contracts are stalled on because then everyone's kind of deliberating, well, what is the best decision? What I think is that I think he should be given the contract extension and actually be allowed to work until he's shown to, continuously, or not continuously, but make some, substantial blunders that'll vindicate, for example, getting rid of him. Because right now, like I said, I don't think you have the basis to get rid of him or anything like that, or not sign the new contract.
Yeah, and we've seen some excellent negotiation stuff from him already. Because we moved on this summer from Nicholas Fulkrug. His stock was high, but not exceptionally so, and he got a very, very good fee for him. So we have seen some signs that we can specifically point to and say that's good. But some of the quotes we saw coming out around his contract extension being delayed was around results. But in my opinion, at least, and the opinion of most people that work around sporting directors and in the transfer market, they essentially think you don't judge the transfer window on a 6-month period. But it was leaked, and we don't know how accurate this is, but it was leaked that one of the things they're waiting for is to see how results change after the winter break, and that to me is nonsensical, because if you look at the quality of the players we've signed, I don't think Guirassi's not performed to his level this season, but he's a very good player. Anton's had some fitness issues, got injured in his first match returning. That's not on the sporting director. Jan Koto's had some injury history. That's on your medical department if he came in not fully fit. But he seems to be a good player. He's still so young that long-term contract, you can't complain. Maxi Bayer has had a bit of a betting in period, but he's a 21-year-old who's very, very promising. Joey, what do you kind of think about the supposed reasoning for not re-signing Kehl, and what do you think about Kehl's transfer windows?
I mean, first, I completely agree with both of you. I mean, as far as the club hierarchy goes right now, I actually feel like I have more confidence in Kehl than anybody else, partially because of some of these deals he's orchestrated. I believe he was the one that was behind the Karim Adeyemi transfer as well. And Adeyemi has kind of had hot and cold streaks, but this season, apart from his injury, he's looked incredibly promising. I don't read into the rumors too heavily, especially because they're just leaked, so it's hard to know how much truth there is behind them. I kind of feel like with the other storylines around the club right now, we know we need a couple more players. They haven't performed to the best of their abilities. I almost wonder if the delay in it is more out of, avoiding negative publicity, because they don't want to necessarily extend his contract right this minute if it looks like the club has not been performing well. Whether we qualify for Champions League, which I think we should, or not, I still believe that Kehl is the right guy for the job. Um, yeah, and especially, yeah, like I said, around some of these transfers, and kind of like what Brian said, I think some of his vision has been marred a little bit by the people around him, whether it's not getting on the same page as Edin Terzic or Lars Ricken or even Watzke at times, which I'm sure we'll talk about Watzke soon.
And just a quick thing too, because you mentioned the transfers, Joey, again, and I think the quintessential example of the opposing argument is, for example, the transfer of Remy Bensebaini, which Kehl did get a lot of flack for because that was a Kehl signing. Even he, especially this season, is coming good now. Maybe not, the ideal left back or whatever, but a strong season so far for Bensebaini, and I think we need to give him props for that.
Yeah.
And that's something that I think Kehl saw in him, and that's why he decided to bring him in. So I think even when you look at the transfers that were criticized a little bit by the general Dortmund populace, even those aren't necessarily turning out to be the worst moves ever. So I have a lot of faith in him.
Yeah, and the only overinflated fee to me that he's really paid is Mecha. I think the bigger issue that I'm going to talk about in a little bit is more the average fee that we're paying, but he has done some very good business, and I think he recruited Cole Campbell. He's recruited Justin Lerma, who's 16, playing with Ecuador's U20 teams in what is now like somehow the tiniest country producing a ton of very high level players. So to get one of their best is very impressive. And that's not to mention Julian Duranville, who's struggled with injuries, but at the time was one of the most highly rated 16-year-olds on the planet and has looked very good when he's played. But let's talk about the guy at the top and let's talk a bit more about the process of how can we start to get a front office essentially in place that will go about things in a consistent way that is effective, innovative, and striving to find bargains and striving to get every ounce of quality on the pitch from every dollar spent. So Watzke is set to retire in the summer. He has essentially handpicked Lars Ricken, club legend, to take over. Do you think this is going to have some of the changes that you want to see in the club? And what are the issues you think exist with Watzke's current process?
Sure. So I do trust Ricken as well. I do like him as a pick. I think he did a great job with the academy when he was in charge there. And I think he's very much ingrained in the club and knows how it's been run. Very close, obviously, very important part of its history. So he kind of like both like in practice and in symbolism really embodies what Dortmund is as a club. And he knows what's important in terms of, you know, how the club is supposed to function, what its traditions are, and kind of what makes it a special club. So I think he's a fantastic pick. I do think you know, the people that he's put in place to replace him in the youth department as well have also very much shown that impetus to, you know, integrate youth players more, and kind of go back to that tradition of having, you know, a youth talisman come through the academy and play an important role for Dortmund. So I think the more we give Ricken time, I guess, in charge, I think the more that emphasis will kind of shine through. So I'm very happy with him being in charge. And the other side of that is because I think the other part of your question was, what do you think the problem is with Watzke right now and how the club functions under him? I think it's a lack of boldness, and I think it's a reaction to the trauma of, you know, seeing a club like Dortmund almost basically go bankrupt. I think there is a severe reaction to that. I mean, because we have to credit where credit's due for Watzke. He helped the club, you know, navigate in what probably was its most tumultuous time in its history. And he was very much the perfect person to help with that transition. I think right now what Dortmund needs is someone who's a bit more bold to be that CEO, and to kind of steer the club into, you know, the new football landscape. And I want to stress also on top in tandem to that. So I'm not saying I want to see somebody come in and spend like crazy money on like players and all that, but I do think there does need to be a bit of a loosening of the purse strings. And I think sometimes, like, when you have situations where Dortmund really don't want to break that that transfer record of like whatever it is, 38 million euros for Adeyemi or whatever, like you need a really
36 and a half plus add-ons, whatever you want to call it.
Exactly. But like if you really think about it in the context of, you know, the football landscape these days, that really isn't a massive fee to pay for a player. And I'm not saying we should pay 50 million per player per position, but if there really is that one player that has proven, you know, through their performances over numerous seasons, that can really be that difference maker, if you have to pay 45 to bring him in, do it. Because that will help you in the long run in achieving your goals. That could be the difference between you winning a title or not. And I know it's not an individualistic sport, and I'm not trying to suggest that. What I'm saying is sometimes those pieces, if, you know, looked at responsibly and really worked responsibly, can definitely, you know, be the tipping point for a club. Now I don't claim to be, an expert on club finances, so I'm sure there's more mechanics that go on with that. But just from what I've seen, like I said, I'm not expecting the club to pay 50 million, but the financial market of football in general has changed, and I think you kind of do have to go with the times a little bit. I'm not saying drastically, but every now and then, you hear about certain players that Dortmund decide to give up on or not pursue because it's theoretically too much. There was an interview back when I believe it was either Aubameyang was leaving or something like that, or after he left. And I believe Watzke said something along the lines of, if Dortmund really thought a player was worth 100 million, and that they could be really that important to the club, they have the money to spend it. And that quote is floating around somewhere. I don't remember exactly what interview from that was, but I distinctly remember him saying that. And if you're saying that's really the case, and granted this was pre-COVID, so let's take that with a little grain of salt as well. But if you're saying that, these days, if there is a player you really feel can bring your club to the next level, or like two players where you might have to spend like 20 million more or whatever, I say do it. And I think with Ricken and kind of with Kehl as well, I think we've kind of started to see the shift a little bit more towards that. Because granted, we might not be paying those massive fees for players yet. I think there's more of a willingness to cast a wider net and be open to that kind of stuff. Because it's not about putting the club in debt. It's just about putting the club in a good sporting position to succeed.
So I'm going to ask Joey a bit of a, I don't know if I should say bit. I think I'm going to ask you a question that's a lot more difficult. So one of the things Brian's talking about is his belief in Ricken and Watzke's kind of being a businessman. Do you think that Ricken on the other side is going to be able to balance his sporting acumen with his business acumen? Because let's remember, like, as much as he is a part of the club and a former player, he has worked at the club, has worked on the front office side of things for a little while now. And do you think that he can essentially balance out his belief? Because when he was a player, it was very much the norm for the coach to kind of run things. Do you think he can find the balance of his belief in how football should be played, his backing of the traditional club values, and find a way to merge that with how modern clubs are run and how essentially you kind of have to break some of those traditional footballing values to compete, in terms of like signing a ton of German players, for instance?
I mean, he's really going to have to for the success of the club. And I mean, when we look at Watzke, in some ways, it feels like, I mean, credit where credit's due. He has done a lot for this club. In some ways, it feels like he may have, or maybe should have stepped aside a year or two ago. But at the same time, Watzke is a businessman, and he knows how to run a business. He knows how to make money, whether it is bringing in young players for a small fee to develop and sell for a massive profit. Whether it's a deal like Rheinmetall, which is not really a, a deal that falls in line with the traditional club values. And Watzke was also part of this investor deal for the Bundesliga that thankfully fell through. So in some ways, it feels like, I mean, Watzke clearly he cares about Dortmund very much, and he wants to make sure that this club stays afloat, that this club has enough money to compete. Um, one of my hopes, I should say, for Ricken is that he is able to find the right balance. I mean, I'm not thrilled about the Rheinmetall deal, but I also understand the importance of having sponsors that can bring in extra money, especially when the Bundesliga is, essentially a league of fan-owned clubs trying to compete with clubs that are owned by state entities and billionaires in other like other parts of Europe. So I think, I do have confidence in Ricken's ability to steer the club toward a place that aligns with our club values. I think it maybe remains to be seen how tough he can be on some of the other aspects, on some of the business parts. Because I mean, I'd love to, I'd love to for Dortmund to just keep on keeping on, but at the end of the day, it is still a business, and we need to make profit. And if we only put our values, I mean, I want to put the values first, but if we look at values alone, then that is unfortunately not quite enough to, to compete for the Bundesliga, to compete for Champions League. So, I mean, I think some of this remains to be seen, but I would say I'm cautiously optimistic for Ricken's ability, whether he steps into Watzke's position or he just remains one of these other guys in a different part of the club hierarchy.
Yeah, so and just to kind of jump off that, because I did find the quote as well, and I want to tie it into what you just said, Joey, because you said, we want the club to be able to compete. Ever since 2018, at least if this quote is to be believed, we have had the resources to be able to do so. Because this quote comes from July 25th, 2018. It was an interview, I believe, Watzke did with Sport Build, and I'm just going to read it out to you guys. Players in the top shelf no longer cost 50 million, but rather 100 million. We could also muster that if we absolutely want a player and of whom we are convinced 1,000%. But to be honest, we'd rather mold such a player ourselves. BVB were always at their strongest when we could develop our own stars. And that is important because that also kind of goes along with, I guess, one of the main roles that Ricken himself has played at Dortmund, and that's developing the young players. Which, regardless of whether we spend big fees on players or not, that will always be important to Dortmund. But it shows that we do have options. We have the ability to make good players in our own academy, so as long as we decide to bring them through. But also these resources, barring the pandemic, have already been there to do things like this, like spend a bigger fee on, some sort of talismanic player. Like, for example, in losing Royce, that's a big loss. You don't fill that hole with just anybody. And sometimes, especially in this market, you just have to spend. So I'm really hoping that Ricken can kind of be more bold in that. And once again, not asking him to spend 50 or 100 million. Just spend a little more. See what you can do. Because if this is to be believed, the resources are 1,000% there.
Mm-hmm.
And if we're going to turn to a lot of the youth, I think this year, as much as the team has struggled, I think we're starting to see the club essentially get into a position where we're set up to have an internal replacement structure for certain players leaving, where we're just promoting the youth. So this year we've seen a ton more players debut. I don't have the statistics in front of me. I've already said them on the podcast, but we've seen a lot of guys make their debuts, and you're seeing guys make their debuts at a younger and younger age for the second team. And I think you're really going to start to see at the start, for the first time ever, when we sell Mullen, I think we are going to replace him entirely internally. Whether that's Cole Campbell, whether that's Julian Hetver. This year, we've seen Jamie Bino Gittins go from a bench player with 1,000 minutes last year. He's already over that mark this year in the league alone. And you're going to see Cole Campbell move into the next phase. And behind him, you're going to see Ousmane Diallo move into the second team. And if it's Julian Hetver stepping up, then Cole Campbell will become the talisman for the second team. And Ousmane Diallo will fill in for Hetver in a more minor role, essentially taking that like wonder kid breaking into the second team role. And we just saw today, news was announced as we record this, Filippo Mane received a fully professional contract. So I think we're starting to get to the point where the club genuinely has one of the best academy infrastructures in the world and has waited long enough to allow these players to get to that point. Whereas like last year, I think we had it in place, but all these guys were 16, 17, whereas now some of them are getting to 18, and the 17-year-olds are farther ahead of where the previous year's kids were last year. So that's hopeful in another light. But let's talk about some of the statistics of players we've signed recently. So you have to keep in mind when I'm comparing this a decade ago, football has changed so drastically but in the 3 years before Dortmund won their last title, 9 of 14 players had German club experience. Of the other 5, none were from top 5 leagues or had received any special offers. Whereas in the last 3 years, obviously this year is not done, but 15 of Dortmund's last 20 transfers have German league experience. 2 of the 5 remaining are from top 4 leagues or Germany. Excuse me. And the remaining 3 include a top 10 Ballon d'Or finisher, a 35 million euro signing in Adeyemi, potentially a bit more depending on who reports it, and Julian Duranville is that one signing that wasn't essentially highly rated via the Ballon d'Or or like like the best German 19-year-old at the time. So what you're kind of seeing there, in my opinion, is a lack of innovation. Whereas like when Dortmund signed Shinji Kagawa, from I believe it was like Okazaki, like that's not a club that was on anyone's like lexicon at the time. So do you think that it's just a question of Dortmund taking some smaller like financial risks, and then with their bigger signing splashing out the cash, backing out the Brinks truck, however you want to put it, to sign that 40 to 50 million dollar player, to fill the biggest hole on your team?
Yeah, I think that kind of aligns with what I was saying earlier and kind of what I expect, Ricken to kind of be doing because he has that focus on younger players. I think, and we've kind of seen this with Kehl as well, because one of the main complaints that I've had for a very long time with Dortmund is the narrow net that we cast in terms of players that we've been bringing in. A lot of like German-based players or Bundesliga-based players, I should say, and not being, like you said, very innovative and thinking about creative markets to explore. I mean, we mentioned Lerma earlier. That is a change and a step up in the right direction. You're going back to South America. You're going back to the South American market and being like, hey, there's talented players here that we can kind of vie for. And I mean, there's complications that go along with that in itself that we've talked about on numerous pods in the past. But I do think that the innovation is a big part of it. And I do think that we need to once again do those transfers like Shinji Kagawa, like Robert Lewandowski from, I believe it was Lech Poznań. So it's like you need to be able to like look at these sort of leagues and pick out the best talents and be like, okay, how can we develop this person? Because these aren't the main leagues that other big clubs are always going to be looking at either. So you have a better chance of finding a gem in those leagues than you do, for example, in Spain or Portugal or France, where you have Premier League and the big Spanish teams really like looking and hawking to be like, oh, okay, this player's good. Let's add them to our roster as well. Because at the end of the day, financially, it's going to be hard to compete with these teams. But if you go back to being creative with those transfers and looking in these different markets, you're bound to find gems because there's good players everywhere. You just have to be able to find them.
Brian,
Yeah.
another example, Lucas Barrios, Colo Colo. What a signing.
There you
But
go.
Joey, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, kind of like what Brian said. I mean, there's talent everywhere, and it's a matter of maybe searching through some of the leagues that are not as heavily scouted. When we look at like the Eredivisie, for example, players who go to Ajax or PSV Eindhoven,
Yep.
if they play
Good
well, they
example.
will always find a deal in one of the big 5 leagues, whether it's Premier League, whether it's Bundesliga, whether it's La Liga. But if we look at some of these like some of the leagues across Africa or the Japanese league, there is just not the same network of scouting as there is across much of Europe. So, I mean, I absolutely agree with both of you. I think on. I mean, these can be some really like bargain transfers essentially, and if we have good scouts in place, then we can find some pretty young players to develop, and whether they become prominent first team players or follow the more recent path of buy for inexpensive young player and develop and sell for massive profit, which also supports the club in a different way. But I sometimes feel like we almost over recruit from the Bundesliga, and it would be nice to see a couple more players come from outside of our own domestic league, if that makes sense.
Yeah, over like the 2 3 year periods that I found, it was only a difference of about 15%. That's because all the time your squad is gonna find like it's gonna get filled out by some free transfers of like your
Hmm.
reserve goalkeeper coming from a German club. But that 15% difference gets a lot bigger if you start to look at what is like a considerable fee, because it's not just the Bundesliga when you're paying like like a loan fee for Ian Matson, and you're paying like a high fee for Jan Koto because he's playing in a top 4 league, and like when you're leaving a top 4 league you're going to the 6th best league and taking a top 10 Ballon d'Or finisher in that season in Sebastian Haller. And so like none of the transfers that are outside the German league or outside of the top 4 leagues are innovative. And I think that's the bigger issue. Like you can have 15 of your 20 top transfers in the or 15 of your 20 transfers in a 3 year period come from the Bundesliga, but the other 5, like you need to be finding surplus value from what you're paying, in my opinion. And I think that's the biggest difference. Where if you look at the old transfers, it's Lucas Barrios, Shinji Okazaki, or not Shinji Okazaki, I'm saying random Japanese players now, but it's Shinji Kagawa, and guys like that you're getting so much value for, like a decent fee in the case of Barrios, no fee in the case of Kagawa. But all those players that aren't from German leagues are pretty much all ballers, like Lewandowski that Brian was talking about earlier. Whereas now, even when we're going outside the Bundesliga, it's the fact it's 25 million for Koto, it's 35 for Haller. It's not that much on Pascal Gross, but for a 33-year-old, you're looking at a average annual value of the fee plus contract of well over 10 million. So it's just so hard to get plus value that way. We have a lot of transfer rumors to go through before we do some quick fire targets at the end of our own. I'm going to start off with Daniel Mullen. I don't know how much time we want to spend on this because I think by whatever time this episode goes live, well, by Wednesday when this episode goes live, I think this sounds like it'll be done. The club is demanding 25 to 30 million. I think this is going to be an undisclosed fee or one where they report it with the bonuses, and I think it'll be in that range with the bonuses. Do you guys have any more in-depth thoughts on it?
Yeah, I had a few thoughts that I wanted to share. So I was actually on the For the Love of Paul McGrath podcast, which is an Aston Villa based podcast run by a super awesome guy named Neil. And I was actually on there with Michael Statham, the football Aranya expert that we had on for one of our pods. Super awesome to talk to both of them. Shout out to both of you guys. It was a great conversation. Had a lot of fun. But one of the main things we talked about, and I think this has been a sticking point on our pod, and that's kind of what I mentioned to them as well, is that, Daniel Mullen at the end of the day is not a winger. We brought him in as the, vaunted Jadon Sancho replacement. They're not even remotely the same player. And I think that's one of the bigger issues. Like, I don't want to sit here and say, Mullen is a player that doesn't have talent, that doesn't add value to a team. He just doesn't add value the way we would want him to add value to Dortmund. A lot of the reason for that being that we're playing him in a position that he just isn't the best at. We brought him in as a Sancho replacement when he was playing in a front two for PSV, and that's where he excelled. We're not playing him in that sort of sense here. And I just think it makes sense at this point to kind of let him go, get the fee, and bring in a player that probably is a better fit for Dortmund out on the wing. And yeah, I mean, from what they were saying, basically, like the kind of selling point for Villa would be the fact that he has that level of versatility. And even though he has a low number of shots, he does have some semblance of a conversion rate. So I mean, if they're happy with it, that's great. And I do think, I do hope that this transfer goes through. I hope Villa can get the best out of him, because at the end of the day, since he's been at Dortmund, I don't think we've gotten the best out of him. I think he's had, elements of seasons that have been, impressive, but it hasn't been consistent enough for me to be sorry about, him leaving to another team.
Yeah, I mean, I pretty much feel the same way. I think Mullen's Dortmund past is brighter than his future. And I mean, he's got contract expiring in 2026. So in a lot of ways, it's like sell him now or sell him this summer or risk losing him on a free transfer. And if he's a player that we can get 20 million or more for, then well, we got to make the deal happen. And since we haven't read this quote in the notes yet from Sebastian Kehl, I'm going to read it if that's all right. He said recently, quote, Donny is an important player for us, and he has been our top scorer in the past 2 seasons. It's no surprise to me that his qualities are attracting interest on the market. Nevertheless, he has great value for us. And to me, that quote it's a very classic quote of um, a bid has come in, a second bid has come in for a player, and we want to make another 5 to 10 million above that bid. So, definitely talking up the value there. Of course, he's attracting interest. He's one of our top scorers, but kind of back to what Brian was saying, we've talked about this on the podcast a lot, is we're just not necessarily getting the best out of him. So, I mean, I think if this exit is feasible, if we can get over 20 million, then I think let's do it. And whether we replace him with a support player or use that money for another left back or even replace him with a youth player, I think we're going to be in reasonable shape. And I don't feel like this squad is necessarily losing a talisman, so to speak.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the biggest loss is like he can guarantee you minutes at a Bundesliga level. He was our leading goal scorer, believe, last year. Like he knows where the goal is, but I think he and the club wanted to separate in the summer. It unfortunately didn't happen because he didn't get the offers he wanted soon enough, and we wanted to maintain squad continuity at a certain point. I think now there's interest because there was always going to be interest. You're a little departed from kind of where you were with FFP. And just to touch on a Matson thing, there's no Matson swap deal here. The issue with it is you need a year to go by, and then you can amortize X amount of that transfer. It's like a fourth of it because I think it's 3 to 5 years. I forget exactly what it is because I do a podcast about Borussia Dortmund and not a Premier League club. But basically, that amount gets taken off. It's not debt. Like you can pay the fee in installments. This doesn't affect it because you amortize and write off like the debt you owe in terms of your FFP year to year. And so the only way Daniel Mullen for Matson would work is if you essentially have us buy Matson for, let's say, 50 mil, because they can put 50 million and it looks like on their books they made 10, and then they buy Mullen for, let's say, 40, and there's some weird stuff going on that way. But I really doubt, given who Hans-Joachim Watzke is, that he wants to take part in some funny accounting, because that would have a negative effect on Dortmund's books in terms of a genuine cash flow thing. So I'm not an accountant. I'm not entirely sure how that would work. Watzke is far more knowledgeable about that stuff than me, but I think that's just not going to happen. And I also just think that eventually, like, Matson had an assist this week. They're having a bit of a down year compared to last year, so you never know how long that manager is going to stay. And if someone new comes in, like their starting left back, Digne is 31, 33 now, like he's getting up there. So it's just for the best. Or wish Matson the best. Gio Reyna to AC Milan's the next one. We're going to go through this one really quickly. It's not a concrete link yet. I think this would be a great move for the player because I don't rate Rangers. His creative output is not particularly high for someone who does not a ton of defensive work. I think he gets overrated because he plays better for his national team. So I think Reyna could definitely compete for minutes there. Uh, if he goes, I think that makes a lot of sense for club and player because I don't think we trust him to play minutes, and he's stuck behind Julian Brandt and doesn't necessarily have the pace to play on the wing. So I'll leave it at that. What do you guys think about this one?
Um, I mean, as much as over the years I've wanted to see Gio obviously succeed, it kind of comes down to what you said there. I mean, the club in general probably do not trust him to be the next well, I don't want to say they don't trust him to have minutes because I mean Shaheen I believe came out very openly and said he's liked what he's seen from Gio, and he likes the player and what he brings to the team. I think if you compare him to Brandt, there is no comparison. Julian Brandt is very much the better player. And it's good to have a player like Gio in the squad when Brandt isn't performing or Brandt needs a rest. But Gio is also, I believe, 21, 22 right now. And I think at this point in time, he needs to be starting games. He needs to be playing minutes. And if we're not seeing him as that eventual successor, someone who's going to have a substantial amount of minutes, I think it's best for both player and club to separate. And I think with another transfer that we're going to talk about very soon, and with other profiles that the club has been linked with, I think they are looking for another attacking midfielder. So it seems like for someone has to make room for another player to come in. And if we're moving for attacking midfielders, it only makes sense that one of the attacking midfielders is going to make room for that. And that player isn't going to be Brandt because Brandt is, at this point, one of the faces of the club. As wishy-washy as he can be, he's still a brilliant player. And yeah, I just don't see Gio getting over him or succeeding him in any way as the primary attacking 10 for Dortmund. So
Yeah, I mean, I think the Reyna rumors are a tricky one because in one sense, Reyna's just back from injury. He's gotten, I think, 2 starts now for the season, which, I mean, he's had tons and tons of injury problems, and I think there is a lot of potential there, but it's a lot of potential that we haven't quite seen. I think in one sense, if he can get a few more minutes, if he can stay healthy, then Dortmund is much better off trying to sell him this summer at a higher fee. But that is still a gamble because if we enter the summer with an injured Reyna, which is very possible, or end up going into the next season with injured Reyna again, we could also be looking at another situation of are we going to let this player go for free, or are we going to extend his contract with the hopes that he can maintain fitness and then maybe break into the first team? So, I mean, I think that the Reyna situation, it's just a huge gamble either way. But um, if if the links to Milan are legitimate and they come through with a concrete offer of 12 to 15 million, I wouldn't be inclined to suggest Dortmund take that. Um, but if we also look at how the squad has been this season, if we think about losing both Malen and Reyna, we got to bring somebody else in just for the depth. So we have enough players, especially with the extra 2 Champions League phase matches. And, then if we don't qualify in the top 8, we're looking at 2 more matches for Champions League. So, um, yeah, I find this to be a tricky one. I'll say that.
Yeah, ship him off to Atalanta. Give him the same stuff they gave Scalvini after he did his ACL, and he'll never get injured again. Quickly, I don't know if we need to talk about this beyond what I'm about to say, but Jimmy Gittins, excuse me, linked to Bayern Munich. Bayern apparently want him as the Leroy Sané replacement this summer. He signed a contract last fall. 0% chance this happens this summer. I think that even if Bayern Munich came in with a 150 million offer, I think they just say no. I think if a club from abroad comes in with a 100 million offer, there's a chance he could go this summer. I think that their plan is to sell him the summer after next, or after the coming summer, and I think that's when he gets sold if he does, and I think it's likely back to England. He's lived in London, he's lived in Manchester. There's a lot of big rich clubs there. What more can you say?
I'm gonna say something in a moment. I just need to pause to let this animal out because I didn't realize my cat was under my bed the whole time. He's been meowing over here, so let me just let him out real quick.
Brian ruining the flow.
Um, I I'll say my one piece about this. Um, I don't think Gittins is going to do us dirty and go to Bayern. I just don't think that'll happen. Could
There,
we lose him for 100 million or 120 million to a Premier League club? Sure, I could see that happening, but um, I don't think he'll go to Bayern. I think, yeah, Gittins won't do us dirty like that.
I don't think he has a choice in the matter. Like, even if he wanted to go to Bayern, like I said, he signed a 4-year deal last fall.
Hmm.
They're like the club can just say no. They can come in and say, okay, we take 100 million from abroad, 150 from Bayern, and then Bayern comes in with the 150 offer. That was a little too easy for you. Let's go 175 with a 25% sell on, and just be ridiculous about it and waste their time. Brian, what are your thoughts?
Now that I've released the beast from my room. Yeah, I mean, I was just gonna simply say it's not happening. There's not a snowball's chance in hell Dortmund agree to anything like that. I don't think there's a world where selling a player to Bayern, unless his name is Emre Can for 100 million euros, actually helps Dortmund in any sort of way, shape, or form. So yeah, I don't know. Yeah, it's not happening.
Yeah,
I think it's
you
as simple
heard
as
it.
that.
You heard it here first. Emre Can homecoming to Bayern. He's been playing for him. Never mind.
He's a
Anyway,
Champions League winner with them.
let's go on to another player who signed a contract renewal last fall in Gregor Kobel. Been linked with Manchester United and Chelsea. Contract renewal last fall. He's got 3 years left on it. Well, 3.5. Uh, yeah, not going anywhere anytime soon unless someone backs up multiple Brinks trucks. If we're talking, I think it'd be the same thing we just said about Jamie Gittins, where it's 100 plus abroad, and even then, I'm not convinced the club would say yes.
Yeah. This is just a simple one for me as well. Just
Yeah,
not happening.
why would he go to Manchester United? I mean, yeah, come on.
People have criticized his um, ability with his feet, but I think that at a certain point, what matters more is the mental aspect of not selling your locker room leaders and
Mhm.
your top players.
That's
And I
exactly
think
it.
that the mental effects of that are just worth more. Let's go to the next one. Milan Skriniar. Uh, he was getting linked with a move to Turkey. His agent likely leaked out that he was linked with Dortmund. Patrick Berger came in, said he's not a topic at Dortmund. Dortmund do not see an urgent need for center backs. I actually don't necessarily disagree with this. I think like one left back coming in would really fill out the squad, and your fourth center back has to be a guy that's very comfortable not playing. So I think that what you would have to pay for any of the names floating around is just a bit high. I think getting a left back that could play center back really matches up nicely because you could rotate with ease with Ben Sabaini, who can do the same thing. Um, I think that's the best move. And also, when you sign a left back, that allows Ben Sabaini to play center back. Filippo Mane, 4-year deal, whatever. Or we don't know how long it is, but he signed a professional contract. We've seen a lot of guys not play until they sign a professional contract. So I expect to see him make his debut for the first team very soon. Do you guys have any comments?
I like Skriniar personally, and I really wanted him at Dortmund, unrealistically so when he still played at Inter. So I think he's a fantastic player. But yeah, I mean, even though he's like what 29 right now, like what are you gonna do when Sula's fit again? Like it's yeah, I don't know. It's nonsensical to think that if he's not playing for PSG that he's going to come and sit on Dortmund's bench, and it's like who does he replace in the starting 11 when everyone's fit? So I don't
Yeah.
know. It'd be nice to have him, but that's just a luxury I don't think we'll be able to afford.
Yeah, I think a best case scenario would be like the 6 month loan, and he was able to fill in when our central defenders are constantly injured. But I don't know if the yeah, I don't really see this one happening.
Unless you're getting rid of someone, then
Hmm.
yeah,
Yeah, and I don't think anyone's coming in for Nicholas Sula after his like most severe injury of his career
exactly.
potentially. Next one, this is David Martinez. He is an 18-year-old young winger mainly, but he can also play 10, either wing. He's valued at 2.5 million euros. Is this a youngster you'd be particularly interested in? I've never even heard of him, and I do listen to a lot of podcasts about young MLS homegrown type talent. So
I mean, this kind of plays into what we were talking about earlier, kind of looking for those unearthed gems in other leagues, and I think MLS could potentially be that league. I mean, yeah, if they get him for a cheap price and like he can be a depth piece for now and either become an important player in the long term, uh, or develop into a player that Dortmund end up selling for some sort of profit. It's a good way to make some money and have some depth. But yeah, I mean that's all I really have to say about that one. I don't know too much about it myself, so
Yeah, I mean,
not
I
playing
agree
for
with
LAFC. I mean,
I agree with what you guys are saying, and I don't have much to add there either, just because I don't know much about this player.
yeah, unless his contract's expiring, I really don't see this one happening unless we're more likely monitoring for the future if he has like a breakout campaign. I believe he's a Honduras international, not entirely sure. Brian's nodding his
I think
head.
you're correct. Yeah.
Next, we're going
Mhm.
on to James McAtee. I think this is done by the time you hear this, because I think this one once Mullen is out the door, I think this one happens pretty quickly. But yeah, both Dortmund and Leverkusen interested. I'm interested. I said on the last show that like there was a certain fee that I think I'd be out at. And I think that's probably grown. I did a bit more thinking about this. I looked in depth at his numbers today. For how bad that Sheffield United side was, he put up almost I think it was like point 0.3 something non-penalty expected goals plus expected assisted goals, which is not great. But that Sheffield United side was so bad. And he's only in his age 21 season currently. He needs minutes soon. I think that Man City does not value him. We've seen a lot of Manchester City academy players leave on fairly reasonable fees. Look at Romeo Lavia to Southampton. Even Cole Palmer, who was much more highly rated than McAtee, and I believe a year younger, left for only 35 million. I think that he's going to be available for right around what I said, which would be in that like 15 to 18 million range, loan with an option. Do you guys have any thoughts?
I like it, especially if and we already said we don't know what's happening with the move for Reina, but I do think that McAtee has the ability to either kind of put it like fit into the category of the two categories that I was kind of talking about. It's either a player that is going to do exceptionally well for Dortmund and then go on again and be sold for a high fee, or he definitely I think has the ability to, once Brandt needs to kind of like slow down a little bit, to kind of take the reins and become that main attacking midfielder. I do believe he can also play on the wing as well, if I'm not mistaken. So he is also a versatile player. The one thing I will say is, unlike Reyna, well, I mean, I say unlike Reyna because we've kind of not given him the minutes, and he's kind of still stayed because there haven't really been any other options. This is a player that's going to look for minutes. So, I spoke to Pedro about this. We did an episode earlier today, and he was basically saying how he can kind of see like Brandt moving almost like more into like an 8 position. And we put him in the 10 here. By him I mean McAtee. So I'm for it as long as we can make all the cogs like run in tandem. If we can put all the pieces in place and actually give him the minutes to perform and be an important player for the team, yeah, I'm hands down for it, and I think he's a very very talented player.
I'm totally in favor of this one too. Even just from a business perspective, he's a young English player, and if he has any kind of success in Dortmund, he will attract more interest from the Premier League.
Yeah.
So even if he was just with us for a couple years, I think that Dortmund could turn a profit on this guy. But at the same time, I could also see him, as an understudy for Julian Brandt. And I mean, Brandt isn't immune to an injury, and We could really use a solid CAM, yeah, just as a backup.
And in previous campaigns, we've seen Brandt still play a ton of minutes while Marco Royce got a ton of minutes at the 10. So I think that I actually rarely disagree with Pedro. Pedro, second smartest Dortmund Dispatch host after myself. But in this case, I am going to have to disagree. I think it would be Brandt at the 10. I think McAtee would play the 8 a little bit, especially against some inferior opponents. But more likely, I think it would just be a bit of rotation. And Julian Brandt is getting up there in age. I think they don't want him to play the amount of minutes he played last season. You saw kind of the fallout this season where he's had his worst injury in a couple of years at the club. So I think it's essentially just competition and adding that depth with a player who can play a little bit out wide and get some minutes there, but mainly just provide some rotation, provide some competition for those 8 and 10 spots. And I think that's a bit more likely in my opinion. But now we come to the most anticipated part of the show, where we're going to quick fire through 3 different categories. The first is broken but could be fun to fix, just like the meme, but this is a player who's had some issues, potentially an injury in recent years, but you think Dortmund could bring him in and revitalize their career. Brian, do you want to go first?
Sure. And it's funny because the player I chose for this could have also fallen into the other section we had with the potential free transfer as well. But I decided to go with him here because his time at Roma hasn't necessarily been what one would have expected. And that player is Nikola Zalewski, Polish winger. Yep, you know.
Oh my god! As a joke, when I told Brian we were doing this, I sent him a screenshot of Transfermarkt with a bunch of Polish players that were expiring this summer, and he was one of them. And I was like, Brian, I already did your research for you. And there he is.
But to be fair, I did my own research as well, and I think I would have chosen him regardless, because I do think he's a fantastic player for Dortmund to look into, and here's why. Very pacey, talented winger that can also play as a wingback, as a fullback. So that adds a little bit more depth in the left back position if need be. So adding that versatility, in my opinion, I think is very important. He also is very
Marius Wolf 2.0.
But more talented.
I'm kidding. I liked him a lot for Poland, I will say. But I looked at his numbers and I was surprised they were bad.
So it really depends on what you're looking at. So yeah, like his finishing hasn't been great. He hasn't really been getting on the goal end of a lot of goals. But one of the things that I like to see from players in his position, and I think we can all agree on this, is his ability to create shot creating actions, progressive carries, and progressive passes received. All those numbers are pretty good in comparison to other players that play within his position. So you have 3.32 shot creating actions per 90, 4.72 progressive carries per 90, 1.15 successful take-ons, and progressive passes received was 8.23 per 90. So all those numbers are pretty decent for the amount of minutes he's had, and there are some of those numbers, particularly his shot creating actions, I believe, and his progressive carries are already better than Mullins in themselves. So, I mean, you're getting an upgrade. And I think he's young enough where you can still develop him. And yeah, I just think he's a really, really talented player that just really hasn't, gotten the ability, or the time, I should say, to really showcase his ability to do so. Because like you mentioned, Eli, for the Polish national team, I actually find him to be one of the more dangerous players when he plays. And I always feel more confident when I watch international matches when I see him in the lineup. So I think that, considering his contract is even expiring in 2025, even if Dortmund wanted to go in and get him in the winter, he's valued at 10 million euros. You could probably get him for like 6-7 million, and you have a versatile player that can help you through the rest of the season. You can then continue on to go and develop him. So he has my stamp of approval, not just because he's a Slav, but also because I think he's a very valuable player that Dortmund could get a good usage out of.
All right, Joey, quickly, who is your broken but could be fun to fix?
I'll go quick. I went untraditional with this one because I was looking, kind of like Brian, I was looking at what players might be in other leagues And I decided to just look within our own squad and pick Marcel Sabitzer because we've seen what he's capable of in the past. I have rated him pretty highly over the last several seasons, both with, well, maybe not as much at Bayern or Manchester United, but certainly with Leipzig, he was an important player. He was a very important player for us in the Champions League last season, and he has just completely underperformed this season. And I mean, I do think Nuri Sahin should get some of the blame for that one for playing him out of position at times. But I mean, we do have a really talented player on our books who could make a huge impact for the squad in the second half of the season if he can find his form, if he can be used in the right places, if he can find the synergy with his teammates. So rather than bringing a struggling player from elsewhere in to fix, I think we should fix our very own Marcel Sabitzer.
Good
Joey, you
shout.
never struck me as someone that wouldn't do their homework, but I guess I was wrong. Mine, I had two quick options here. Fabiano Parisi is having a down year, but he was very good last year over in Italy. But my real shout, because I want to do a zero euro challenge, is Rooney Bargi is available on a free. He's a wonder kid who you may know of because we played against him in the Champions League with Copenhagen. He tore his ACL as he was in the midst of a breakout campaign with 7 goals in 1,100 minutes. I think you get him while he's on a free, and you beat other clubs to a signing. I'm going first for the Wonder Kid category. I wanted to find an innovative name here, but because I'm doing all free transfers, I have to go with the most obvious one, and that is with one of the best number eights in the Bundesliga this season. It's Tom Bischoff. I don't need to say anything about him because we just played Hoffenheim very recently. This guy's 5.5 shot creating actions per 90, over 5.5 progressive passes per 90. He's over 4 tackles and interceptions per 90. Like, he's a do-it-all number 8. I can't say enough about him. He's a little small is the only thing, but he's 19, available on a free. Bayern are offering a purchase with a loan, and I think if you offer him first team minutes right away next season, I think you get this done in a heartbeat. Even if it forces you to take a big loss on like an Emre Can leaving for a cut price fee, or a Marcel Sabitzer leaving on a cut price fee. But Joey, who is your wonder kid?
So a player that I've actually started to rate kind of highly, who I wasn't that familiar with prior to this season, I'm picking Nathaniel Brown from Eintracht Frankfurt. He's a German U21. He has 8 appearances this season, 3 goals and 3 assists as a left back. And a left back is a position that Dortmund could certainly use some depth in. So why not bring in a young, promising player? And I know I was complaining about over recruiting from the Bundesliga earlier, but kid with Bundesliga experience.
He just signed with Eintracht Frankfurt last season for, I think it was 2.5 million, and I was like, if we don't believe in Tom Rotha, why aren't we signing this guy? But yeah, I would have liked that because the two of them could have been our left backs this season. And I would have been very happy with that. But yeah, not signing him anymore because he just moved to Frankfurt. He'll cost a boatload. Brian, who is your wonder kid?
It's funny. I just want to comment because you mentioned Bischoff. That was actually going to be my free transfer prior to me trying to get a little bit more creative with it because I was like, someone's going to take him and I don't want to double up. So I actually, for my wonder kid, I actually went with another attacking midfielder and another pole, actually, because when we were winning trophies, we were stacked with poles. So why not try and do that again? Kacper Urbański. I don't know if you guys have heard of this guy, but I sure as hell have, and he's a fantastic player, and I think given the right circumstances, he could really, really bloom. So he's able to play as a winger, can play as a center mid, as well as an attacking mid, and has actually played a little bit as a defensive midfielder, though admittedly not that much. So I really wouldn't see him in that role specifically because he is a very much more of a creative mind and a playmaking type player. He's a very strong passing ability and good vision for chance creation and more than proficient dribbler of the ball overall. And yeah, just a creative dynamo in my opinion, and he's great, like quite very 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 good at popping up in the final third as well. So we kind of just look at a little bit of his numbers. So shot creating actions 3.09 per 90 for Bologna at this time. Progressive carries is at 2.04. Successful take-ons is at 1.66, and progressive passes received is at 6.71. Also on a limited number of minutes, so take those numbers with a grain of salt. I think it's actually only been he only has like 1 goal in 7 games, but he's only aged 20. Pretty versatile. I think he could be a really good addition. One of his main weaknesses up until this point, from what I've been able to see whenever I've seen him play for the national team, is his finishing. I think that's something that he needs to work on. Something that I find very important in an attacking midfielder is not necessarily, someone who scores a boatload of goals, but, creates a lot of chances. And when given the opportunity to score goals is fairly clinical. So I think that's something that I'd like to see him improve on, but I think Dortmund could definitely help him do so. And yeah, that'd be 2 of the 3 polls we need to win the next Bundesliga title. So let's go.
And coincidentally, we do play him soon, so we can get Shocking on the touchline, shake his hand after the game, dap him up, tap him up is what I really meant. But Joey, we'll let you go first. Who is your free signing?
So this one might be a little funny too, but my free signing would be Danny Olmo, who it seems like is becoming a free agent through Barcelona's mismanagement of funds, which is kind of a funny situation, but he's a really strong Spanish player who it's looking like is going to be stuck not able to play for Barcelona in the second half of the season and becoming a free agent. I know there are some reports that are suggesting he is just going to stay and play this waiting game. And I know this would be, this is a very optimistic idea. I think he would much more likely go to a club that can afford to pay him more. Um, but as of right now, I believe he is a free agent. So why not come to Dortmund, especially if we offload a few players in the window? He'll be able to play Champions League.
That is bold, but I like it.
I do not. He will be fit for 50% of the season, and he's coming in on a free mid-season. He's gonna get 30 mil as a signing bonus. No, thank you. Brian, who's your wonder kid? Or free signing, excuse me.
Free signing. So I'm gonna read you guys the short list I had, just because I was kind of having a little fun with it. So the first players I thought of were of the list that I saw were Oliver Boskagli from PSV, because we've been linked with him before, and he's versatile, and that could kind of fit kind of a few roles that we need. Tom Bischoff, like I mentioned earlier. Jonathan David, which is unrealistic as hell, but I mean, one can dream, right? And Human Son, mainly because I've wanted to see Son at Dortmund for a very, very long time, but obviously not really realistic, nor does it really make sense at this time.
Big regression the last 2 years.
Yeah, so, but just a short list. That's not none of the players I went with. So, and I guess the criteria I set for myself were realism, area of need, and possible uptick in value and room for future development. And the area of need that I went with was fullback, and the player was actually Tariq Lamptey from right.
I had a different left back.
Okay, well, we'll get to that shortly. But I think this is a great player to look at because he's only 24. He's had really good seasons in the past, has been pretty damn good for Brighton this season. So I think he has 2 goals and 2 assists. His progressive carries are pretty good, 3.41 per 90. He's in the 93rd percentile for non-penalty goals in his position. Assist-wise, he's in the 91st percentile. And he also has, I believe, a substantial amount of progressive passes received as well. Don't have the number here for some reason. That's my oversight. But regardless, he had really good numbers in all those categories for his position, and I think he complements who we already have in the fullback position pretty well. We have Puto and Rierson on one flank, and then we have Bensebaini, and then Lamptey could kind of be the more attacking version on the left side of it. And I also think he has good resale value. So 24, 25 years old, let's say he spends 2 seasons with Dortmund and we go back in for a certain Tom Rota, right? We can hopefully make some sort of profit on Lamptey because we get him for free, bring in Rota, and yeah, you kind of a win-win situation there. I know it's not, as simple as that always, obviously, but if an English player, as we said, kind of with all the English players that we've already had and have to this day, if they perform well at Dortmund, they attract attention. So Lamptey could be the next one to do that, get us a profit. We bring back our academy player. Everyone's happy.
So I had 3 players. I had Tyrick Mitchell, who's a left back, also currently playing in England. I had Amad Diallo. What ruled me out of
Diallo as well.
What ruled me out of him is he actually has his contract is currently set to expire, but United have the option to extend for an additional year. And then I found the guy that I really liked, and I thought that I haven't seen him play yet, but I thought statistically there was a little something interesting and free transfer. So my plan for him would be to sign him, loan him out to a top 5 league next season, get him a ton of minutes, and then bring him in once Nicolas Sula returns. Whereas with Lamptey, you would essentially have him come in as the backup to Bensebaini. Bensebaini's contract expires, you bring back Rafa. So similar situation in this case, except we'd be bringing in Jarek Gazieriowski, who brought I see. I could have cheated Brian, but so I texted Brian about this guy, and he was like, "I can't wait to see how you try and pronounce this." I could have cheated. I did not. Brian Goncharovsky.
You did good.
Thank you.
There you go.
So Jarek Goncharovsky is a left-footed center back playing for Valencia. He came out of their academy. He's a Spanish U19 international, regularly playing in La Liga. He's very aggressive statistically, so if you wanted to throw him out at left back every once in a while, he should be mobile enough to be able to do that. Valencia when I looked at him, Valencia were currently in the relegation places. I think they've picked up a point or something since then, so maybe they're out of it. But Peter Lim is notorious for getting money anywhere and everywhere he can, and running his club into the second tier sooner or later. So I think you can very easily pick him up on a free, loan him out next year, and he'll be ready to compete for some minutes once Nicolas Sula's contract expires, and you can get him in and have him ready on the cheap before that. He is a Polish dual national, so that makes Brian happy. That's what I know.
That's the trifecta right there. You got Goncharovsky, you got Zalewski, and Urbański, and we're back to winning titles. That's all it takes.
Okay, well, that's been it for us. Is there anything you guys want to plug before we head out?
Yeah, you can follow me on Blue Sky or Twitter. I haven't really been using them too much the last few weeks, but yeah, writing for BVB Buzz and Fear the Wall right now. So check out my writing. I'm sure there will be more coming out in the near future as the season gets back up.
And I'm taking a little bit of a step back from my writing, a little bit. Not really writing for BV Buzz at this time. Still writing for GGFN every now and then. But the main things that I actually wanted to talk about are 2 episodes that we're going to have coming out. So, well, one is technically already out. We did an episode, by we, I mean Joey, Pedro, and myself, about 7 of the top talents in South America that Dortmund should keep their eyes on. Super good piece for BVB Buzz by Pedro. For those who haven't read it yet, I highly recommend you go do so. It was a really good read, and we had a lot of fun dissecting it. So there's that, and we'll also have a preview episode for the Leverkusen game coming out. We actually did that with Jules, who was at one point part of the Leverkusen podcast when they were still active. And yeah, is just a very knowledgeable, Leverkusen fan. So shout out to her for being on the episode with us. It was super insightful to learn, more about our opponents, how they function, and what we can kind of learn from them, and how they function, and kind of apply that to the Dortmund model, because I do think there are quite a few things for Dortmund to learn from them. And yeah, so you should listen to that. I think it's super insightful, and yeah, you guys will definitely learn a lot from taking the time to listen there. So once again, shout out Jules and shout out Pedro for also being on that episode.
Well, we've had a ton of bonus content for you during the winter break, so we can make sure that you got your fill of German football content and Borussia Dortmund content. So just make sure you go back if you missed it and catch our mid-season review, our episode on upcoming Brazilian talents that Dortmund might be interested in, and then our preview will be out shortly after this podcast to discuss the match with Leverkusen. So keep an eye out for all that content and more great stuff coming for you guys soon. And we really appreciate your support and hope to make this new year a great one. So that'll do it for us. Have a good one.
Jadon Sancho to score. No mistakes this time.
That is a rocket.
Royce out. Another fantastic goal by Marco Royce. Haaland's volley is beautiful beyond
Jetzt
compare.
kommt das Wunder von Dortmund. Foulspiel von Inso an Götze.
Needs to lay it off. We're going to shot away. Oh, what a goal!